As the debate rages here in the United States about funding for the United States Armed Forces and the Department of Defense to give weapons and systems to Ukraine, one of the questions that I like to ask my detractors, the people who think that they know better, who think that sitting back in the United States, they could use the false equivalency argument of saying, hey, we're giving $500 million to the Ukrainian army. How come we're not giving that $500 million to the homeless? Well, it's pretty simple. The people who are saying don't give money to the Ukrainian army are the exact same people who would say don't give money to the homeless. But I have a different challenge. I don't like to have people say, well, explain to me why we should be supporting the Ukrainian army. There's a better way of looking at this. What I like to say is this, especially when people say, Malcolm, why did you join the Ukrainian army? Why did you want to go over to Ukraine? Why did you want to fight? Well, I didn't go to Ukraine to fight initially until I started learning just exactly what was happening to the population. I just couldn't look myself in the eye and think that I was going to be on television commenting on this from time to time while talking about the American insurrection, while the people that I came to know and respect were being killed. It's just one of those things. Can't look in the mirror and expect myself to feel good about myself pointing to an arrow on a map. That's just not the way I'm made. But one of the things that I like to do is I like for people to explain to me just exactly why they oppose giving resources to Ukraine. And what I do is I set them up with a personal challenge. And this is a personal challenge I want you, the listener, to take yourself. I want you to think back across this entire year, all of the images you may have seen, and think about the one that upset you the most. There is one. I know there is, because if you haven't, some image that you saw, some atrocity, some child crying, whatever it is, and you ignored it for the last year, then you either A, haven't been paying attention, or B, you're just a cold, stone-hearted person. But for me, it was this first story. If you look over my shoulder, you'll see a painting, which was done by the great artist Mike D'Antuono, also known as the Norman Rockwell of the Resistance. But he did this painting in an iconic form, like a Ukrainian or Russian Orthodox Church icon, of a Ukrainian army soldier. Her name was Irina Savila. She was a mother of 5. And in the first week of fighting, she didn't go into the rear area. She didn't run away from her duty. She didn't hide behind the fact that she was a mother of 5 to get out of fighting. She stayed at her post, and she was killed in action, defending against the Russian invasion. And this photograph of her has a young girl in her arms whose name is only known as Paulina. That's all we know. And Paulina was killed in a car coming from Mariupol with her mother, father, and brother. And the only way that they identified her was a photograph with her parents and the bracelet on her hand that said Paulina. She was 8 to 9 years old. Now, one of these two images doesn't upset you. The very fact that a 9-year-old child could be driving a car peacefully with her parents and have a Russian tank vaporize them and kill them to where she had to be identified by a bracelet. Then there's something wrong with you. If the image of a woman with a rifle in her hands going out to defend a country that the day before was at peace and everybody was having, having ice cream and kebabs in a very advanced Western country. It wasn't Eastern European third world the way many people think. But this woman stayed with the armed forces and lost her life as one of the first lives in this war when the Russians bombarded her combat unit's position. She has 5 orphan children. 5 orphan children. But you know the one that upset me the most, the one that made me say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do this, was when the Russians bombed the children's theater in the city of Mariupol that had giant block signs written on it, children inside. The city's theater, playhouse, opera house, with over 1,000 civilians in it. And the day after that sign was put up, the Russians bombed it and killed what they believe as many as 600 to 800 civilians. And you wouldn't know because most of them burned to death. And the thing that I saw was a BBC shot of the body of a little boy, clearly had to be 3 or 4 years old at the most, being brought out of the theater, being handed up to the paramedics. And the paramedics handed him over to another one and put him down on a stretcher. And you can tell by the limpness in the body and the paleness of the skin, that child was dead. And that child had to be handed off to the paramedics, and the paramedics themselves had to try to resuscitate him. That, while the paramedics were there trying to do CPR with 2 fingers and crying, knowing this child was dead, knowing they had to go through the routine. That was my point, where I would not take this any longer. I would not allow the Russians to rampage through that country. I would not sit on my ass and let this happen without doing something for Ukraine. And I went and I joined the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Now, there's another Irina who typifies the opposite side to this story. And her name is Irina Starikova. Irina Starikova was a Russian army officer. She was a sniper. She's 41 years old with 2 children. And she came to Ukraine and was lauded using her call sign, Bagheera, the Black Panther tiger from the Jungle Book. And she is claimed to have had 40 kills of Ukrainians. Now, we don't know whether they're soldiers or civilians, but she was lauded as a hero until she was wounded in combat. And do you know what the Russians did? They abandoned her on the battlefield with what they thought was mortal wounds. In my time in Ukraine, there's one thing I can tell you as a fact. The Russians don't take their wounded from the battlefield. You're wounded, you're going to die. And people joke about, hey, how do you claim the Russians are losing 10-1, 15-1? It's simple. The Ukrainians take their wounded off the battlefield and they fix them up. They put them in convalescence and they recycle them back into the armed forces when they're healthy. The Russians leave you to die. So Bagheera, Irina Starikova, was left behind on the battlefield to die. And you know who saved her? Ukrainian army soldiers. They found her. They bought her out. They put her into the combat trauma system. They saved her life. And that's just right. The Ukrainians are good-hearted, decent people. They don't leave their bodies on the battlefield. They don't leave the bodies of Russians on the battlefield. They don't leave their wounded to die. This was one thing that I liked about them. They were jovial. They were kind. They were men and women of honor. And they didn't go around bragging when they shot 40 Russians. I've been asked that. I was a sniper. And then when people ask me, how many people did you kill? How many Vatniks did you vaporize? It's none of your business. I did my job. I covered my brothers and sisters. But you know what? Only due to the kindness of the Ukrainians is Irina Starikova going to survive. She is surviving. She's a prisoner of war now. But she'll be held accountable for the war crimes that she and her unit have perpetrated. There are 2 opposing forces for the soul of Ukraine. One of them is just plain fucking evil. That's the only way I can put it. The Vatniks out there of the Russian forces, they don't care about whether Putin wants to take land. They did a study based on their captured communications of Russian soldiers who were in prison camps and off the bodies, the text messages sent from the bodies of Russian soldiers who were killed when they analyzed their phones. And the number one chief purpose of Russian soldiers in Ukraine was to make money. They wanted to buy a car. They wanted to go with their family on a seaside vacation. These are the things that they talk to themselves about. They don't talk about purifying Ukraine of Nazis in a country led by a Jewish Jewish president. They don't. They steal washers. They steal vacuum cleaners. They take what they want. They steal money from people's houses because they're poor of mind. And if that means committing evil, they'll do it. The Ukrainians want their land back. They want their people safe. They want their children to learn their language, practice their religion, get their education without the belief that someone's going to come in and bombard them or kill them because they speak Ukrainian or because they are on the land of Ukraine, which, by the way, is 25% of the world's wheat. Flour. That's what Russia thought they were going to take. They were going to take 42 million slaves and steal 1/4 of the world's flour production, and that they would have that country back to slam the door of autocracy in the face of democracy. And then they would have been emboldened to go after 3 or 4 NATO countries: Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and quite possibly Poland. The two Irinas, the mother Irina Sevilla, who's pictured here with young Paulina, and the war criminal, Irina Starikova, the sniper, who was proud of her work. They represent two different worlds. Irina Sevilla will be honored as a hero of Ukraine. She has already been given that honor. She served her country in defense of her country. The other one came to kill and steal, and she will be tried as a war criminal. The Ukrainians have lost quite possibly more than 15 to 17,000 soldiers dead in this war. It pains me. My own battalion, 1st Battalion International Legion, has lost as many as 20 men and women dead in the first year. That's a pittance compared to the Ukrainian Army regular line units. My unit, 3rd Battalion Special Operations, has lost 5. We lost 5 in as many days due to landmines and artillery. We've never lost a man in a stand-up gun battle, never. Because like the Ukrainians, we're not fighting the people in front of us because we hate them. We are fighting side by side, elbow to elbow, with the men and women of Ukraine because we love the people who are behind us. The children of Irina Sevilla, the extended relatives of Paulina. We're fighting for what we love. But when we see those who are carrying out these crimes, who carried out this invasion, it is with cold-hearted, ruthless calculation that we destroy them. But this is not ending. This is just episode 2 of a show that started a year ago. That's how busy it's been. But there is a good war being fought here by good people. And I want you to listen to just think about this. Hey, Malcolm says this is a good war. I am telling you with my heart, this is a good war. When we shoot Russians, we wound them, we find them, we take care of them. We medevac them with our people. We hit them with our own tourniquets. We get them off the battlefield. We treat their bodies with respect where we find them. We are not evil. But the Russians, on the other hand, I don't know what they are. We call them orcs, like the orcs in Lord of the Rings or the Warhammer games. They are soulless, dirty thieves with guns. It's our job to neutralize that. But you know, every once in a while, when we talk about a moment of goodness, there's always another moment of evil. And we're going to talk about that next in Top Secret Storytime.